Welcome back to Tightwad Workshop. Today we're going to see if we can sharpen these three kitchen knives to a useful cutting edge using this oil stone. I'm going to start with a bit of theory first, so if you're in a hurry you can jump straight to here where we get started on the actual knife sharpening process. I talked a bit about oil stones in a previous video. You can find a link to that one up here or down in the video description if you want to watch it as well. We'll be using the basic knife sharpening technique described in this book. I've had it for about 10 years and I really wish I'd opened it up and read it a bit sooner. We're going to be using these three knives in this video. This is a very cheap brand new knife that I bought this morning. It was part of a set of three for $6, so this is probably worth about $2. It's made out of stainless steel. This one's a small step up in quality. It's made in Japan, it's probably about 20 years old, and it was probably about the equivalent of $10 when it was new. It's also made out of stainless steel. This is a vintage butcher's knife. This cost me $20 at an antique store, but it probably cost about the equivalent of $50 when it was new, 50 or 60 years ago. Unlike the other two knives, this one's made out of carbon steel rather than stainless steel, so we've got to be more careful to protect this one from rust. So apart from our oil stone and leather strop, we're also going to need this small square of paper. Now, this isn't for testing sharpness this time. We're going to fold it in half, and then in half again along the diagonal, to give us this 22.5 degree sharpening guide. Knife sharpening steels like this one also have their uses, but talking about these is going to need a video all of their own. I'll make a link to it up here and down in the description when it's ready. So knives like these start out as a big flat sheet of steel. The basic knife blank shapes are cut out using a suitable method, then these two angles are cut into the metal using a grinder. For the rest of this video I'll just call these the primary bevels. So we don't want to have to resharpen the entire width of the primary bevel every time the blade gets blunt, because that's a lot of metal to remove. What we're going to do instead is form this secondary bevel about 1 mm wide right on the cutting edge, using our 22.5 degree angle. Now we're really just using this 22.5 degree angle because it's easy to make by folding our piece of paper in half twice. In reality, a few degrees either side isn't going to be noticeable for our purposes. So if we look at it in cross-section, our knife blank started out with parallel sides like this, then had the primary bevels ground into it. If we zoom in on the cutting edge, we'd be able to see that it still has a flat surface on the top. We're going to grind in our secondary bevels a little bit at a time until hopefully they meet right in the middle of our blade and make a nice sharp edge. So before we start sharpening, let's just do a before test on each of our blades using this piece of chuck steak. This cut of meat comes from the very toughest part of the cow, and you know that when it has a label on it like this that it's going to be hard to slice cleanly. I've also set up this camera for extreme close-up photography. It's not as good as a microscope, but it should be good enough to get us about a 20 times close-up on the cutting edge of each of our blades. This is the $2 cheapie knife. It doesn't actually look too bad, although it could probably have those serrations smoothed out a bit on the secondary bevel. This is the Japanese knife. If I zoom in a bit closer, it looks like the edge has been bashed against a hard surface and rolled over. Maybe someone was using it on one of those terrible glass cutting boards. So we'll start with the brand new $2 cheapie. You know, rather better than I expected. Now we'll try our Japanese knife. Oh, that is blunt. You can see we're sawing away and barely making a difference. And finally we'll go with our vintage knife that I actually sharpened a while ago. So as you can see, that one cuts pretty well. So on balance, as we'd expect, the one that I've already sharpened works pretty well. This one is blunt as, and I have a bit of a suspicion that our cheapie is cutting more like a saw than like a razor. But this one will only take a few strokes. That one will work a lot better with a little bit of work. Let's get the stones out and see how we go. So basically what we're trying to do here is use our 22.5 degree angle guide to set up what a 22.5 degree angle feels like. Once we've established that, we're going to move the blade across the surface of the stone gently, and that'll grind in our secondary bevel. So we'll start that process by lubricating our stone with a little bit of dishwashing liquid. Now before I do that, our stone has two sides. We've got a coarse side and a fine side. We're going to start on the coarse side for this one. And this is the aluminium oxide stone, which out of the two kinds I have generally has a smoother surface. So I'll just smooth that over the whole surface of the stone with my finger. Work out what our 22.5 degree angle is. I'll just hold the paper on the side for that. So now I'll start at the base of the blade. Oh, and as you can see, our new stone is very thirsty. They're quite porous. So once again, I'll put our blade on there using our guide off to the side so it doesn't get all wet. We'll start at the root of the blade, and just to get a feel for how it goes, you're putting very gentle downward pressure. Most of it's just going forwards. Once you have a feel for how it goes forwards, we're going to go forwards, and we're also going to draw the whole length of the blade off this way. I might have put a little bit too much dishwashing liquid on there. So we'll do a few passes on that first side, then we'll turn it over, holding the handle in the right hand, and do the same thing. This time we're pushing forwards and moving this way. Okay, now I'm going to turn the stone over and go to the smooth side. If it gets dry, you can see it starts to take off some of the stone's surface because the aluminium oxide's fairly soft. Okay, that's smoothing out pretty well. And if I very gently rub my thumb this way, I can feel it starting to grip. This is very gentle. Definitely don't wipe your thumb along the length of the blade or it'll work just like a paper cut. So the very gentlest of touches. I can compare that to the Japanese blade, and it doesn't grip my thumb at all. So what we can do with this guy now is move over to the strop. Because this is the first time we've used the strop, we're going to put some of this cutting compound on. We just rub it on like we would a crayon. So this stuff is the same sort of buffing compound that you would use with a metal polishing kit like this. It's quite cheap to buy. You can use the strop dry as well. I just find that this works a little bit better. So to strop the blade, obviously we can't use that same slicing action on it or it'll cut the leather. So we basically turn our blade around and we do this as though we're buttering a piece of toast, but we're pushing down a little bit more than we would on the bread. I do like to work away from myself for this, so I'm moving to my left hand here. And I'm stopping well before my fingers. Okay, so let's see if that's made an improvement to this first knife. So this is the before image on the left, and as you can see, all we've really done to this one is grind another bevel onto the existing secondary bevel. I guess you'd call this a tertiary bevel. The serrations look about the same as they were when we started, but as we saw before, this one was unusually well sharpened for a brand new cheapy knife. Anyway, the real test is how well it cuts our steak, so let's give that a try now. So as you can see, we can just pull it straight across now. Now unfortunately, because there's been dishwashing liquid on this, I'm not going to be eating this. I'll give this one to the dog. So let's move on to our second blade. So it looks like this knife is made out of a lot harder grade of steel than the one before it. so it's taken a lot more passes across the stone. But I've now got it to the point where I can turn over the stone to the smooth side. So this will just be a few passes on each side, and then we'll move on to the strop. Now the downside of a harder steel is that it takes longer to sharpen, but the positive out of that is it'll hold that sharp edge for longer. Okay, so I'm going to gently do the thumb test again, and I can feel that it's gripping on my skin. And again, that's just the very gentlest of touches. So now we're finished with the stone, and I'll have a nice clean workbench now too. And we'll move on to the strop. Now, one neat thing about having the strop in a box like this is that we can hold it like this. Okay, so now let's see if we've improved the cutting edge on this knife. We'll try and get a nice thin little strip. Well, I think that's better. Just like that. So after spending about 20 minutes on this knife, we've made the secondary bevel about twice as wide as it used to be. And if we zoom right in, you can see that the folded over edge is gone and the serrations are a bit smoother than they used to be. Now once you've got your knives nice and sharp, you're really going to want to take care of them so that they stay sharp. Now the first thing you should do is to not just jam them in the cutlery drawer so they rattle around and bump their sharp edges against each other. That'll blunt them really quickly. Now the second useful thing that you can do is to store them in a knife block like this. This is how I store all of my nice sharp knives. The other thing to keep in mind is when you put them in, you want to have the sharp edge up so they're resting on the back of the knife on the wood. The final thing you should do is wash your good knives by hand in your sink, rather than putting them in the dishwasher. Now the reason for that isn't because of the heat of the water changing the temper in the steel. It's nowhere near hard enough to do that. It's because it'll ruin a handle, especially a wooden handle. It effectively dries them out and takes all the oil out of the handle. It can also ruin a plastic handle. This one has been through the dishwasher a few times, and as you can see, it's starting to go all powdery. So there you have it, a cheap, simple and relatively lazy way to sharpen your kitchen knives. Although if you do happen to strike a hard steel one like this, you're going to have to be ready to invest 20 or 30 minutes on it. For our next video, we'll be cleaning and sharpening garden shears like this. Once it's ready, you should find a link to it over here. Hope to see you for that one too. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Tightwad Workshop is filmed in front of a live studio audience. We'll be using the basic knife sharpening process described in this dummy.